What wedding moment made you think they are not going to last long? Story 1. Not the couple getting married, but the best man and maid of honor who were married to each other. Best man's speech was all about how hard it was to be married. I've been married for a year, and it feels like 100 years. Maid of honor stands up to give a speech and just says ditto. It was so awkward and really brought the whole room down. Brother of the bride stood up and gave a nice impromptu speech about teamwork and having a partner to go through life with. How happy the family was to have the groom join their family. Best man and maid of honor were divorced within a year. Couple who got married are still married 30+ years later. I sometimes wonder if the speeches actually were helpful in how not to act as a couple. For me, the complex backstory: bride's brother is gay and has been in a long-term relationship for 40+ years. At the time he gave his speech about marriage, he couldn't marry the man he loved, and I think his passionate defense of marriage was born from that. When people would say they were against gay marriage because it makes a mockery of marriage, I'd think of that night. The married couple who had no respect for marriage could easily marry, and did over and over again. And the man who stood up and defended marriage could not. He's married now and lovingly takes care of his husband as he battles health issues. Story 2. She told me 2 days before that she found her fiancé annoying and that she didn't like him and that he was awful in bed. She was visibly endlessly uncomfortable at the rehearsal wedding dinner combo. Then she sobbed the entire morning. Day of. She ended up not getting any makeup done because she wouldn't stop scream sobbing and refused to get dressed, stalling the wedding approximately 35 minutes. She then said 45 minutes of vows that she had prepared, 9 pages of things like inappropriate vows to friends and family, his parents and sisters, none of them her husband, and then almost didn't say I do. Managed to get yeah, okay, yeah, I do, out of her almost a full 60 seconds after she was supposed to say anything. I could go on for hours, but it was the most painful and awkward wedding I've ever been to. I've got my money on 10 months. We're 1 month in. Edit. 2.5-month update. I've distanced myself from them completely. She is really clingy and likes to gossip about how awful her husband is, and I really don't have the time. She's also told me they're in couples therapy after I expressed negativity towards some extremely concerning things she said regarding their relationship, plus lack of communication. But I'm still betting on 10 months because she believes it's all his fault and truly believes his parents and sisters are exactly the same. Newsflash, they're all lovely people. Edit #2, 5-month update. I no longer associate with them, so I'm out of the loop regarding juicy details. Last I heard, they keep moving all over the country and fight nonstop. No more lovey-dovey images on social media. Seems to be right on track for a 10-month breakup. Edit #3, 2-year update. I win. Well, kinda. I feel like that's horrible to say. Does that make me a bad person? It's been 2 years and I've been meaning to update this post for a while. My original bet was 10 months. They lasted 1 year and 10 months, almost to the day. I wish I could say that this entire journey has been bittersweet, but honestly, it's been hilarious and funny and sad and unnecessary. I feel really, really bad for my husband's best friend. She trash-talked him all over Facebook and shared all their private text messages. It was disgusting on her part, and he really didn't deserve to deal with her. I'm so glad he's free from her now. Story 3. I've got 2. One of my good friends got married, and I'd never met her before the wedding because she's just shy. On the wedding day, she was belligerently drunk before the ceremony even started and couldn't even get through the line she was supposed to repeat. That is, I promise to love you. She ended up slapping the groom, spilling champagne on her dress, and then crying under a table while he tried to comfort her. They lasted about 4 months. Another one was my wife's friend. She's a very conservative, religious white girl who married a black man. Most of her racist family didn't approve of the marriage and didn't show up, but she planned the whole marriage around race. Like a vanilla cake for her and a chocolate cake for him, the wedding colors were black and white, and even the meals were white meat for her side and dark meat for his. It was extremely uncomfortable as a guest. They lasted 2 years, but broke up because he was abusive and almost killed her rather than the weird racial tension. Story 4. Source, my wedding. We'll start 3 days before. The wedding was a Ren Fair-style wedding outside at a large gazebo, and the maid of honor had promised to purchase a stylized dress for my bride that they had agreed on. 3 days before the wedding, she calls to tell us she had no money and was embarrassed to admit it. So we literally hand-sewed on together in 24 hours. IMO. It turned out pretty nice for what we had. Bride's mother was supposed to pick up the cake in ATX and drive an hour south for the wedding. She left her house 30 minutes before the wedding to pick it up. When she finally showed up, an hour late, the cake was destroyed. She put it in the back seat and drove like hell all the way down, just slamming it against box with every turn. During the 1-hour delay, there was almost a fist fight between 2 groomsmen because, well, the MOH showed up in the dress that she was unable to afford. Obvious attempt to upstage the bride. The same MOH during her speech after the ceremony started it off by saying, "When we all met, I did not like Dracarim 411 at all. However, I found that he grows on you like a fungus." Needless to say, my entire side of the family was super cold to all of this. Since all of these issues were on her side of friendships or families, I was told to suck it up and we'll discuss later. I sort of assumed that a lot of these friends had just shown themselves the door. Quite the opposite. In fact, 2 years later, when I accepted my first well-paying job out of college, it became an issue that it was an hour and a half out of Austin, so she decided to just stay in ATX to be with her friends. I mailed her the divorce papers, and since she couldn't be bothered to even show up to the hearing, I've never seen her again. Story 5. Not at the wedding itself, but I used to work at a David's bridal. Bride came in with tons of friends. We did the say yes to the dress thing, and an hour later, she's standing there in $3,000 worth of stuff and doesn't have any money with her or in her account. She decides she wants to apply for the store credit card. I run it through the system, and she gets denied. She then calls the groom for his info, which, to be fair, people did all the time, and he tells her no. She threw a huge fit on the phone with him, standing on the bridal stage, literally demanding, "Why not? Why?" Like an actual child over and over again. I've never seen a 30-year-old age backwards so quickly. She was just a brat, literally stomping her feet in front of me, all her friends, and the other bride in the store. I was embarrassed. At the end of all of that, she hangs up on him, and her friend is like, "I'm so sorry you can't get your dress." And the bride stops crying instantly and just goes, "Oh, I'll get the dress. I just have to do this at home. And when he gets mad enough, he'll come get it for me, so I'll stop." Speechless. Sure enough, girl came back 2 days later with her man, and he applied for the credit card and bought the dress. He was livid and silent, and she was smug as hell. Can't imagine they're having a happy marriage if they are still together. Story 6, I'm witnessing one from the sidelines now. My wife's brother just got married this past May. Bride's mother is a big DIY person and went a little nuts with extra flowers, table pieces, decorations, etc. Note I said extra. It was already decorated by the venue. She just took it upon herself to buy and add way more stuff. Anyway, a few weeks ago she sends my Emil, groom's mom, an email with receipts of all the extra stuff she bought, $7,000 worth, and asked that she pay half since it was technically set up in time for the rehearsal dinner for guests to enjoy. It's causing a huge rift between the newlyweds since the bride is taking her mom's side. Story 7. My wife got invited to a client's daughter's wedding. The couple were both drama students. Many of the bridal party were drama students. The maid of honor's toast consisted of tearful declarations of unrequited love to the groom along the lines of, "If it couldn't be me, I'm glad it's my best friend that's marrying you." The best man's speech was a lusty declaration of, "If it doesn't work out, call me, babe, like the previous time you called me." Other toasts were similarly weird. A guy at the table I was seated at was a friend of the bride and said to me that he was this close to standing up during the speak now or forever hold your peace thing. I'm still not sure if the whole thing was a bunch of emotionally ed-up 20-year-olds or one big piece of performance art. Story 8. I was maid of honor. Me, best man, and the couple went into a separate little room to do the signing stuff. Bride excused herself to go to the bathroom, and the groom started making pretty mean remarks about her cooking, say she's passionate about, to the officiary. She came back, heard they were talking about cooking family meals together, and gave him the warmest smile, thinking he had praised her. He scoffed awkwardly and changed the topic. That always stuck with me. He wasn't laughing with her, but at her behind her back. And her. They lasted 7 months. Story 9. He ended up at the emergency room between the ceremony and the reception. He went out the night before with his sister and friends and got plastered. They had to hold a cold pack to the back of his neck to keep him vertical during the wedding photos. Marriage lasted 30 days until they had a fight. She left the house, and he filled the U-Haul truck with everything but her clothes. Story 10. When the bride tried to playfully feed the groom some cake, pulling it back once it got close to his mouth. The third time she did this, he slapped it out of her hand and stormed off. In the ensuing awkward silence and wide-eyed staring, we all knew it wouldn't last. Surprisingly, they were together for nearly 2 years before the bride eloped away with her stepbrother. No one saw that coming. Story 11. Prior to my wedding, I'd asked my husband to practice dancing with me because I'm uncoordinated due to a disability. He blew me off and said we'd be fine. As we were dancing, he spoke in my ear, not even quietly. "What are you doing? What's wrong with you? You're embarrassing me." We lasted 2 years. Leaving was the best decision I ever made. Story 12. My brother's ex-wife. Throughout the exchange of vows, she was looking at everyone but my brother, making sure all eyes were on her. Later, she instructed the photographer, a family friend who was cheap, to mingle and get shots of people being happy. Within 10 minutes, she'd summon the photographer back, shouting, "Whose wedding is this? I meant get shots of people being happy for me." Edit. Thought I'd add, they broke up when she cheated on him. Apparently that marriage she was desperate for was only good while it brought her attention. Story 13. The bachelor party and the bachelorette party were in Vegas at the same time, across the hall from each other. The bride and groom got in a huge fight on the last night of the trip, and when I was leaving, I said, "I'll see you guys at the wedding," to the groom, and he replied, "I'm not sure there's going to be one." There was a wedding, but they were divorced within 18 months, I believe. Story 14. I worked at a museum that also doubled as a wedding venue in the summers. As part of the wedding package, the museum would stay open after hours for the guests only, so I'd just sit there and greet people basically. One wedding got particularly rowdy. Almost everyone was drunk. People were jumping into the fountain. Someone vomited in said fountain. At one point, the bride is crying. Turns out the groom and one of his groomsmen were screwing upstairs in one of the bathrooms. A fight ensued between the groom and the father of the bride, and cops were called because it really got ugly. Entertaining for me, but I felt so bad for the bride. Story 15. Groom got into a fist fight with the father of the bride. Split after 4 months. Context. Groom and bride's dad, actually most people in these families if I'm honest, have pretty aggressive drinking problems. Father-in-law has always hated him. I wasn't around for what actually set it off, but it ended when the bride got in the middle, got an elbow in the eye, and the happy couple left for the night. This was in rural Canada. Not Letterkenny, but basically Letterkenny. I'd say the father-in-law won the fight, though. Story 16. Portuguese wedding. Fist fight broke out at the head table during the reception. Between two groomsmen, they were arguing about which of them had slept with the bride first. Groom was oblivious. He came home from work early one day 2 years later and caught her in bed with another man. Surprised it took that long. Midnight buffet was amazing, though. Story 17. The most beautiful wedding I've been to ended in divorce. Venue was where the groom's father is buried, and he cried as he made his vows to the bride there. Turned out he'd been cheating on her for months, and they divorced a while later. Something so repugnant about marrying someone you're cheating on practically over your father's grave. To date, it's the only wedding I've been to that ended in divorce. Story 18. The bride and groom did the first dance, then spent the rest of their reception completely apart from each other, getting faced with their own separate friend groups. The only other dancing all night was the bride dancing with her high school friends, the father-daughter dance and the mother-son dance, during which the groom was crying. The best man's speech didn't mention the bride at all and basically boiled down to, "Groom, you're married now, but our bond is older and stronger. All of our hunting and fishing trips together are the best thing in our lives. Can't wait for more." Such a sad, desperate atmosphere. They made it a little over 1 year. Story 19. My best friend's wedding is tomorrow, and I told her about how I've heard several wedding photographers, videographers say that shoving cake in the face is almost a for sure factor that they're going to divorce. She told me, "Oh yeah, I told him not to, but he probably will anyways, so we'll see how this goes." Update. She put the cake in his mouth respectfully, but he booped her nose 2 or 3 times, which wasn't huge, and they just laughed it off. I cried a couple times during this wedding because their love does seem very genuine. So sorry if this wasn't the update you were hoping for, Lowell, but I'll give a 1-year update. Story 20. Showed up to the wedding of a friend of my husband's who I knew casually. When we arrived at the church, the groom was very drunk in the parking lot and getting drunker by the minute. I thought it was kind of nuts, since it was a full Catholic ceremony which involved lots of kneeling and standing. I honestly have no idea how he made it thought that, but he did. At the reception, he proceeded to continue the drinking party, while his new wife cried in the washroom. When it was time for the first dance, he kind of stumbled around the dance floor despite a year of dance lessons. When it was time for him to take his new wife's garter off and throw it to the bachelors, he instead did a striptease-type dance and got himself down to his underwear in front of many elderly family members. People were shocked and talking, and all in all, it was a show. I gave this marriage a year or 2 tops. They, however, are still married 25 plus years later. Story 21. I'm a wedding photographer, and I have a few of these. When a very young, not dating long couple say things like the partner is perfect and we never fight. When there's name calling, I particularly cringed at, "It's because we so get each other and are so comfortable that he can call me dumb slut as a nickname." They didn't last the year. One where the wedding was all about the groom promoting his band. He even sang his bride a song that was literally just him showing off his vocal range with some classic piece. She stood up and joined him on stage halfway through, and he looked annoyed that he had to share the limelight. They lasted about 2 years. He was sleeping with the other vocalist in the band. Story 22. When she went alone on her honeymoon because she booked a trip to the Caribbean, despite her newlywed husband having a severe sun allergy. Edit, because this kind of blew up and I saw some mean comments about her. She was a good friend, and they had been together for some years. They married young, and it didn't occur to them that it would be strange if she went on the honeymoon and he stayed behind. He was a good guy and just wanted to see her happy, and she really wanted to go on this vacation because she had never left the country. They separated half a year after the wedding, and my friend, the bride, told me that the marriage had been a way to prolong the relationship, despite both of them knowing that it was already over sometime before they got married. Kind of like a couple gets a baby to save a marriage. It really was just sad because they were a nice couple, but they stayed friends after separating. And I can guarantee that she didn't cheat on him while away. They were both really loyal. About his sun allergy, he had red hair, a really fair skin, and burned up within minutes. And I mean really bad sunburn, the kind you have to go to the hospital for. He always had to wear sunglasses, long-armed shirts, and a hat, even on cloudy days, so the vacation was not for him. Story 23. I was the best man at a wedding a few years back. At the rehearsal dinner, his future in-laws were treating him like crap. They were bossing him around, making him do crap, and talking down to him. They didn't let him hang out with his groomsmen afterwards while the bride went out and got drunk. They are now divorced. Edit to add a little detail. Yes, he should have stood up for himself. His ex's parents were making him do crap for the wedding the next day, and he was too nice to say no. For you youngsters out there, this is cliché, but you really do marry the family, and the apple doesn't fall far from the tree a lot of the times. Story 24. When the maid of honor professed her love for my brother during her toast at my brother's wedding, and her husband walked up to the head table, picked her up, and carried her away before she could embarrass him further. They lasted about 3 months after that. My brother and his wife, on the other hand, are still happily married 20 years later. Story 25. When they disappeared for half an hour during the reception, they were both saving themselves for marriage and were desperate to bone down, which is a fine thing to want. But it turns out that was more or less the main reason they got married. They made it almost a year. Story 26. I was kindly included in a last-minute +1 to the wedding of a family friend who I'd never met before. At the rehearsal dinner, or the German equivalent, the Polterabend, the guests smashed ceramic and porcelain items on the ground. I was fresh in Germany, so this was all pretty out of context and frightening, but my boyfriend explained that it's a tradition, reminding the couple that life is sometimes difficult and you have to work together to clean it up. The bride kind of half-heartedly motioned to the groom to sweep it up. He did a little bit, then just moved on to talk to his friends, leaving most of the shards strewn around the yard. Additionally, I don't think I saw the couple talk to each other once over the next 3 days of celebrations. It was a gorgeous wedding, and I'm so grateful that I was invited. Really good way to begin living in a new country, but it wasn't surprising to hear that they'd divorced a few years later. Story 27. I used to work for an event center that hosted a lot of weddings pre-COVID. After one ceremony, I saw the groom slap the butt of one of the bridesmaids in the hallway. She laughed and with a big smile said, "Oh, Jeremy, you'll never change." Edit. Thank you so much to the kind people who gave me my first Reddit awards. Story 28. The ceremony was delayed because the bride and groom were on the phone with the groom's mother, who refused to come to the wedding, trying to be talked into still going through with it. Apparently, they had a huge and physical fight the night before. Their roommate at the time didn't come either. He told me what he saw in the house the night before was enough for him to know this wedding was doomed and they should not be dating, let alone getting married. Edit. In an attempt to answer some of these questions. First, this was about 20 years ago, and we are all in our 40s now and have moved on with life since. So I don't know why the mother wasn't there. I just remember thinking it was weird when I noticed she wasn't, and then later heard they were on the phone with her. The roommate was visibly angry when I went to pick him up for the wedding, outright refused to come, and I think ended up moving out and basically disappearing after. He was a big dude who worked as a bouncer at clubs, and my impression was he had to go into work mode the night before in his living room and wasn't happy about it. I never heard details, and I wouldn't have felt right asking for them. I am still friends, in the sense that I see them every few years, with both the bride and groom. See my comment below for how they turned out. Happy ending considering. I should also add, the years in which they dated and got married, all of us were very heavy binge drinkers. We were in our 20s and worked service industry jobs. It seemed normal almost for this much drama to be around. Looking back, I don't have the same opinions. No one involved ended up in rehab or prison and all live relatively normal lives now. Story 29. I was the maid of honor. They seemed like the perfect couple, together for nearly 10 years and had this big, expensive, beautiful wedding. Bride would have been happy with a small event, but told me groom had a big family and had insisted. Alarm bells hit when I sat with her parents in the front row and realized the groom-to-bride ratio was so massively off. The groom had 3 best men, as well as ushers, etc. His sister and one best man read something during the ceremony, And then all three said long speeches about him at dinner. It was all about him. The photographer was even his friend's mum, so she kept whisking away the boys for these hilarious lad shoots. The bride was ignored most of the day, and in the evening he got too drunk, spilt a drink over her wedding gown, and danced with his friends. It felt more like a big birthday party than a joint event. I'd never seen that side to him, but I felt so sorry for my friend. It was like she was just there to be a prop to his plans and look good. 3 months after the wedding, he began being emotionally abusive. A month after that, he admitted he'd been having an affair for years, then left. If I hadn't seen the way he behaved at the wedding, I never would have guessed he had that in him. Edit. As so many people are being kind, I'll update you. My friend hasn't been able to trust or date again yet, and it's been 4 years. However, she has become an amazingly brave woman who's traveled to some amazing places alone and is now retraining to change careers. I think she learned never to be a backseat passenger in a relationship again. Honestly, the way she handled the whole thing with such grace and determination makes me so proud to be her friend. She basically told him when he left that he would never see her or hear from her or about her again. She dropped all friends that had a connection with him after he left and made sure he would always live his life wondering if he made the right decision and what she was up to. I really hope his dying thought is about her, and I know for a fact hers won't be about him. She'll find real love. Story 30, I live for these threads. Anyway, I know a photographer who was offered to shoot a wedding on the Gold Coast, Australia. If you're from Australia, then you know the Gold Coast, while beautiful, has a lot of Jersey Shore types living there. It's kind of like Miami, but no celebrities and very, very trashy. My friend is getting shots of everybody getting dressed up at the same time because the groom, groomsmen, bride and bridesmaids are all getting ready in the same room. The groom decided to have his bucks party, bachelor stag do, the night before, so they're all hunger over as and snorting line after line of coke, something that is making my photographer friend's job hard because she can't get any nice shots of the groom or groomsmen without these illicit in view. The energy in the room is getting uncomfortable, so the bride asks if they could take it easy on the coke and get a couple of nice photos. The groom yells, "Shut up, cunt," and keeps snorting. The girl who got my friend the gig said they divorced like 4 months later. Another friend of mine was pressured into marrying his girlfriend of like 8 years because she dropped an ultimatum, propose to me within a year or we're done. He does so they get married, but of every wedding photo she posted on Facebook, neither one of them looked happy. They divorced barely a year into their marriage. Story 31. This was my sister's best friend, and it was a bachelorette party moment. Bride had been having an affair, everyone knew it. The groom's friends tried to tell him, but she convinced him they were making it up. I mean, at that point, it was just sad. She actually had the balls to force fiancé to apologize to the guy she was sleeping with for the accusations. The night of the bachelorette party, she actually took all her bridesmaids back to the other guy's house and spent the night with him. He came to their wedding. It was so awkward. Everyone knew and everyone was talking. The groom was told but chose to overlook it. After the wedding, she insisted the other guy come on vacations with her and her husband and included him in all their social functions. Now, if they're non-monogamous, whatever, go crazy. But her husband was an absolute wreck about it for years, and she just kept gaslighting him. No one could convince him to leave her. She told my sister that affair guy insisted he would never marry her and didn't want kids, so she was using fiancé to get them. They ended up divorcing 2 years later after their second child was born. She immediately moved in with affair guy, and they did end up getting married. Edit. I wanted to add a little more context since this comment blew up a bit. Everyone involved in this story was really young, except affair guy. He had already been married and divorced and had a few kids of his own by then, but he was still well under 30. The original couple had been together since middle school, and all this went down between the ages of 21, 23. I think the husband was just really naive and invested in the relationship. Small town, marry your high school sweetheart and live happily ever after bull. Affair guy did not go with them on their honeymoon, but he was included in group vacation plans before and after the wedding. Other people in the friend group did start refusing to go if he was involved. The bride had this really twisted power move that husband was not allowed to disrespect or offend affair guy. Any jealousy or suspicions were his own insecurities, and anyone who said they were sleeping together just didn't understand platonic friendship. Affair guy was just a good friend, her best friend really, and husband needed to get over it. Bride and affair guy are still married, and the second child is likely actually his. Groom married a girl they went to high school with and seems content. Story 32. She had a panic attack while getting ready that he wouldn't show up, while implying he didn't actually want to be married again, but they were too far into it for him to back out. They were both barely 21, and it was his second marriage. Did I mention they got engaged 6 weeks after they met? And they only waited that long because his divorce wasn't final. She was relieved when he did show, and only had a few shots to build up his courage to be there, i.e., he was faced by 11 a.m. They separated a year later, but she somehow ended up pregnant around the same time. They got back together for the baby and then divorced when the baby was 2. Within a month of separating, she and their kid was living with a new guy that she had known for 3 weeks. ETA, please don't share elsewhere, etc., etc. Story 33. Friend's wedding back in 2016. Somewhat nice affair for us, given we were in our early 20s and all. I was a bridesmaid and really hadn't met the groom much prior. He was nice, but quiet. Day before wedding, the bride, a longtime friend, asked me to help babysit one of the groomsmen because he was a nightmare. Asked me, other bridesmaid, DJ, the works to help cut him off from alcohol before the ceremony, not to allow him to make a speech, keep him from hitting on girls. The works. He was an alcoholic douche with 6 kids and 2 DUIs, but was the absolute best friend of the groom. Day of the wedding, best douche breaks into the bar, gets hammered, has to be dragged down the aisle, gets the florist drunk while they pretty much have on the dance floor, and makes what I can only assume to be a speech during the father-daughter dance. The bride was pissed and stressed as well, trying to get things to not be a total show. Groom blocked us from keeping him in check, wanted us to just let it go while he did everything the bride asked he not do. It was like a weird, purposeful, or intentional self-sabotage thing. Douche also broke into the groom's private stash of homemade mead he'd made special just for the wedding, stripped his clothes, and ran through the parking lot hiding in bushes at 11 p.m. Same night, the couple texted me asking if I'd want to be their third in their open relationship, which I find out later was mostly the groom's idea. I also found out later they got married pretty quickly because she suddenly needed medical benefits all the while he had been asking for an open relationship for the complete duration of them being together, but she'd only acquiesce if he would marry her as well. Divorce finalized a year and a half later. Edit to add, no, I did not join them, don't where you eat. And no, stop asking if I'm X or Y person. Some of y'all have apparently lived through very similar situations apparently, but stop asking if you know me. I may have posted, but I have no intention of doxing myself or the people in this story. Story 34. This wasn't specifically a wedding moment, but rather a reception moment. Here's the basic background information. The couple in question had been married on some tropical island or another, and since the majority of their friends and family hadn't been able to attend the ceremony, they had decided to throw a lavish party upon their return. This had prompted the pair to spend borderline absurd amounts of money on what might very well have been the tackiest celebration I've ever seen. Imagine renting out the cafeteria at an elementary school, then hiring a celebrity, who happens to be a half-blind orangutan, to decorate it. Commission the services of an expensive caterer, but require them to serve only the sort of slop that you'd find at a low-rent county fair, citing the fact that nobody likes fancy crap. Finally, enlist a disc jockey whose idea of an appropriate first dance song is Freaks of the Industry by Digital Underground. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but that really was the song that they chose. Now, everyone has different tastes, and it might seem reasonable to assume that the newlyweds were getting exactly what they wanted. That was what I had been telling myself anyway, until shortly before the money dance, the announcement of which was the first time that I'd ever even heard of the tradition. When I overheard a suggestive piece of gossip, the couple had apparently already argued about the amount that had been spent on the reception, with the bride claiming that the whole thing was a disaster and the groom insisting that it was classy A's. He had been so certain of this, in fact, that he had used his new wife's credit card to pay for it. She had reportedly been rather upset when she'd found out about that and had temporarily kicked him out of the house, which had prompted him to stay with an old girlfriend. Something untoward had allegedly occurred during the man's exile, but details were lacking, and his spouse had decided to forgive him. That was already bad enough, but the rumor, at least as I understood it, was that the aforementioned money dance was supposed to help them recoup their financial losses, with the implication being that the future of their marriage was riding on them receiving upwards of $30,000 in a 4-minute period. As I considered all of this, and as I mentally added up the amounts being pinned to each partner, I found myself thinking, yeah, this isn't going to last. TLDR, grifting groom gets grabby, gormlessly gambles gaiety. Story 35. It wasn't at a wedding, but it was the first time I really sat down to talk to the couple. They came to town about a year after the wedding, and my wife, cousin to the groom, and I met them for drinks at one of the cool parts of Cool City. One of the first topics of conversation was what we knew about the lifestyle scene, a word which in this case means swinger. Afterward, I pointed out to my wife that the bride seemed to have been rather openly and boldly flirting with her. My wife shrugged it off because I'm often pretty terrible at that kind of thing. We met one more time, this time for a funeral. After the ceremony, we were hanging out in a hotel room drinking. The bride again seemed to be pretty openly flirting with my wife, and this time was going out of her way to show off her talent for bedroom knots. Again, the groom is there in the room. I pointed out all of this again, and this time my wife tacitly agreed. The two would divorce soon after. The bride, it seems, only discovered or accepted that she was a lesbian after she'd gotten married. Story 36, it was mine. Ex-wife had a taste for theatrics and wanted a choreographed dance number for the first dance, wanted the whole wedding party involved, but there was no interest. I'd never danced, not even at a club, but was willing to take lessons with her with the understanding we would do something together so she could have her dream wedding. I sucked, but got through a few lessons of slow dancing. I can now awkwardly shuffle around, but don't expect anything crazy. The dance school wouldn't choreograph anything for us, so she promptly gave up. When it came to choosing the song, she decided she wanted I Want You To by Weezer, my favorite band, and the song had just come out recently, which has like a jamboree feel to it. It is not a slow song to slow dance to. I suggested we choose something else, but she insisted we would just slow dance to it. I made her promise she wouldn't change her mind. Sure enough, 30 seconds into the song, she backs up and starts dancing a jig. I just stood there in disbelief, fuming while she kept shouting and motioning for me to dance in front of all our guests. To boot, we had set a budget, she exceeded it. Then her parents decided to chip in $5,000, and rather than use it to offset what we were over budget, she decided to spend more. In retrospect, that should have been a huge clue that she didn't respect me at all. Cheated on me and ran off with some guy like a year later. Got remarried before we were legally divorced. Her parents never did hand over the $5,000 because they'd put a provision on it that we had to go up north for a weekend and take some stupid Christian financial planning course their friend ran. My ex was also an atheist and didn't want to do that. But knowing Lou spent the money we didn't actually have. FFS. Story 37. When I was in college, I went to a wedding with my girlfriend at the time during one summer. She and I had only been together for a few months, so it was actually the first time I had met the bride and the groom, and most of her family for that matter. I didn't really say anything to my girlfriend at the time, because I didn't know them at all aside from stories she told me, but I had a feeling like they wouldn't last very long. At the reception, she spent most of her time just talking with her friends, and didn't interact much with anyone else at all. He went around and tried to get time with everyone, but every so often I would see him with her, and she would kind of not even acknowledge that he was there very much. When I walked past her one time on the way to grab a beer, she was bragging to her friends about how much money the dress cost her and how he wanted her to get a cheaper one, but she wouldn't have it. At one point of the night, I was outside smoking with some of the other guests, and he came out the back and asked to bum a cigarette. He was one of those types of people that only smokes when they are drunk, which apparently wasn't that often for him since he was doing his residency at a hospital, so he was always really busy. The entire time he kept looking at the door, and whenever it opened and someone came out, he quickly moved his hand holding the cigarette behind his back, because he thought it was her. It was like he was deathly scared of her and not like in a playful way. It didn't surprise me when about a year later they got divorced. Apparently she just kind of was taking advantage of him, staying home all day. She didn't work, spending thousands of dollars ordering clothes and shoes online using his money and credit cards she took out in their names. Story 38. While they were planning the wedding, the bride came to me and asked, "Is it normal to realize that getting married is a huge mistake, but still go through with it? Do you think we can still be happy?" I tried to talk gently to her about everything, and she admitted that her and her groom had already had, and that if she didn't marry him, nobody else would want used goods, and she would go to hell. They got married. Worst part is, they'll probably stay married forever because they are very religious and God doesn't allow for divorce. It was real hard to watch the bride cry as she walked down the aisle. Not happy tears either. Edited to add, just want to make it clear that I do not agree with what she felt. I tried to gently explain that her not being a virgin does not make her used goods. Her response was, "Well, you're a Bible Christian, so God isn't happy with you either. But at least you married a man so you can hide it." This poor girl was raised to believe the worst that Christianity can offer. She was 17 when she was getting married to her 18-year-old groom. It was just a devastating wedding. Story 39. That was my thinking at my own wedding. I had no control over it. It was all his family. Had the reception at the local fairgrounds. Fried chicken and corn on the cob for the meal. Husband chewed me out that there would be no music and absolutely no dancing because he refused to dance. Mill and Sill ordered 6 cases of cheap champagne and got pissed when no one would drink it, including me. They literally could not give it away. The after party, as the reception was like 2 hours for lunch, was at the MIL's. The husband promised as a wedding gift that he was officially done smoking. He had his entire family form a circle around him so he could quickly try to smoke a whole pack, blocked from my view. I had a friend pick me up and I left. There are significantly more WTF moments before and after, but we lasted 2 months. Story 40. Quickie green card wedding. Bride told the justice of the peace the wrong pronunciation of her husband's last name and an entirely wrong middle name. Luckily, the justice took the fall for the mistake and didn't call out the bride for literally not knowing the name of the person she was marrying. But yeah, that wasn't a great start to their very short marriage. Story 41. Didn't attend this wedding, but the whole relationship smells fishy. A couple I'm close friends with have a friend who moved back home to her small, conservative town after college and all of a sudden changes her mind about her dreams of going overseas to do a PhD and become an archivist. Instead, she starts posting about a new guy she's just met and started dating. 3 weeks later, she posts that they're ring shopping. About this time is when she starts bailing on commitments to her friends, becoming less and less available in friend group chats. She always has some excuse why she can't meet up or hang out, even when she's bailing last minute on her friend's bachelor party that she planned. 3 months after they meet and start dating, she posts that she and new BF are now engaged. None of her friends have met him still. Res flags, alarm bells, sirens are going off to us. She sees none of them. 3 months after that, she posts that they snuck off and got married. A full 6 months after they met. None of her friends have met him still, and she's still suddenly just not available for her friends. Instead of going to get her PhD in history or literature, she's filtering through part-time job after part-time job at coffee shops, banks. From the perspective of her friends, it looks fishy. It looks like she's met some small-town good old boy who is isolating her from her friends and support, while also rushing her into a marriage. She's never been in a serious relationship and grew up very sheltered. It's just worrisome. She's naive and easily manipulated. I mean, if a new partner wanted to go ring shopping after 3 weeks, I'd run. But this girl is naive and thinks she lives in a Jane Austen novel. So I'm betting either the marriage fizzles out when the excitement wears off, or she realizes years down the road after having kids and settling in that she's made a mistake. She has no means to support herself independently either, so, it just worries me. Edit. For everyone saying there is no guy, she's posted photos with him and her family has met the dude. There are wedding photos with both families pictured. Comments from both families on these posts to socials. Reddit detectives. Story 42. This would be the wedding of my own parents. They had been divorced for many years but told us, the kids and their spouses, they were planning to get remarried. And would we like to go with them to Las Vegas to witness this event? We were all still in our 20s, so we thought, hell yeah. Flash forward to 2 days into the weekend, and there has been no word of a wedding. The kids all had a conversation. What should we do? Should we ask about it? That should have been our first clue that it wasn't a good idea for them to get married, but lack of perspective made us oblivious to the obvious. So we pressured them. Hey, you told us you were going to get remarried. When are you going to do it? Anyway, then, we suddenly found ourselves in a courtroom speaking to the judge. He was wise and asked to speak privately to my parents, and I'm sure asked them, why are you doing this? Are you sure? Well, I guess they gave him the correct answers because he did it. Long story short, they ended up divorcing again, not long afterwards. Story 43. I've been to a few. The first was a tossed-together Santa-themed wedding for my wife's cousin. He'd gotten his girlfriend pregnant, so they rushed to get married before the baby came. The wedding was held at a VFW with the groom and bride dressed as Santa and Mrs. Claus. The groomsmen and bridesmaids were all dressed as Christmas elves, and the music was provided via a boombox. It was 1997. You could tell that no one was happy about the wedding. The parents of the couple just glared at each other, and I don't think they ever spoke. I honestly think the only one who was excited was the groom. They had the baby a couple months later and were divorced almost immediately thereafter. Another was a 19-year-old friend of my daughter. My daughter was the maid of honor and really didn't like the groom. Apparently, he was from a very conservative Christian family, but had managed to hide most of his most extreme beliefs. The wedding started off typical enough, but soon veered off into bat craziness. There was talk about the wife submitting to and obeying the husband, that she was his helpmate, and she was to provide him with children. It was very Handmaid's Tale and came as a total shock to most people in attendance. Several people around me audibly gasped when the minister essentially said the only responsibility of the husband was to consider his wife. The marriage lasted less than a year, and thankfully they split up before they had kids. Story 44. Guy friend got married. At the reception, she's on one side of the room talking. He's across the hall, same thing, talking to someone else. She either snapped her fingers or did the come here finger sign. I can't remember which it was, but she summoned him to her. When he got there, she wanted him to hold her train, and she kept on with her conversation. Typed out, it doesn't sound that bad, but when it happened, I was like, really, lady? It was rather degrading to watch him get treated like her servant. Turns out they're still together, but for his sake, I wish that hadn't been the case. Story 45. My best friend always dreamed of her wedding day, having children, etc. We had been friends since we were 2, LOL, so I know. We talked about it a lot, and we vowed we would be each other's maid of honor. A boy came into her life, and she was head over heels for him. But he never really seemed to be the romantic type. Long story short, they got engaged, and all of a sudden she didn't want a big wedding. She wanted an elopement with no bridesmaids. Then the talk of children came about, and she didn't want children anymore. I know that plans can change as we grow older, but this wasn't her. Nonetheless, I supported her. They did have a big reception. My only guess is that this was the compromise. At the reception, I remember the groom just not being around at all. He just drank and hung out with his friends and barely spent time with his wife. WTF? In my heart, I knew it wasn't going to last. Well, 0.5 years into the marriage, this man-child cheated on her and broke her. It took her a while to recover from it, but today, she is so much better off with a man who is treating her right. And she is happily talking about the wedding she has always dreamed of, and children. Story 46. The drive back to their hotel. I drove them from the wedding venue back to the hotel. I had lined the back seats with plastic like a scene from Dexter because the groom couldn't stop vomiting. They were both unbelievably drunk. The entire ride she berated him while he cried. She was furious the wedding had ended early, 12:30 a.m., because she wanted to dance and drink more. She'd been cut off by the bartenders at midnight, and then her friends had also been cut off for giving her more drinks. I could have cleaned out vomit. I cannot clean out the awkwardness of that 15-minute drive. It was obvious this marriage was never going to make it. It's been 8 years. They're still together. Somewhere out there, there's a couples therapist who has earned their money. Story 47. Me and my wife had a little wedding lunch with my friend and his fiancée, now wife, and the best man. We had brought our son with us because my friend getting married hadn't met him yet, and he wanted to. He was 1.5 years at the time, so naturally, he was curious about being in a new place and getting into things that was visibly annoying her. As the afternoon progresses naturally, the question comes up, how long after the wedding do y'all want to have kids, if any? And it turns out he's dying to have like 4+ kids, and she hates kids and doesn't want any. They had a huge fight, and we ended up leaving. They still ended up getting married and just celebrated 1 year a couple of weeks ago. But me and my wife, as well as the best man, are having some doubts. Story 48. I was invited to a high school friend's wedding. The night before the wedding, she asked me to join her future husband's bachelor party. He had no friends, and it was only he, his brother, his father, and I. They were not thrilled with my presence. They wanted to go to a strip club, but thought I would rat them out. We to a bar, but I could tell I was the turd in the punch bowl, so I went back to the hotel and they went to a strip club. My friend called me after I got back to the hotel. She asked me why I didn't go to the strip club, and I told her that it wasn't my thing. She asked if we could hang out and catch up. I said sure, and she came to my room only wearing a robe. It was obvious there was nothing on under it. We watched a movie and she fell asleep. At some point in the night, she left. The next morning at the wedding, I was sitting next to a mutual friend. This friend was encouraging me to object and looked disappointed when I didn't do it. They lasted 5 years but lived together less than 2. Story 49. I was the best man at my brother-me wedding just a few months ago. His wife was a bridezilla and her family encouraged it. The entire weekend and even the priest at the ceremony said, "A son is a son until he takes a wife. A daughter is a daughter all her life." My mom is a single parent, and my brother and I have taken care of her house and such since she hasn't remarried. He's disappeared since the wedding. His wife doesn't want him helping his own family. It's really weird. Basically, the only time I see him now is to watch his dog and take them to the airport when they fly to see her parents every month. Story 50. I had a college roommate for 2 years. That was a really nice guy. He was a little weird. He would stay up all night watching ESPN. He lived for sports. He'd then sleep until noon every day. Only took classes during the afternoon or night classes. He went back home to his dad's every single weekend. Never stayed around for a weekend. After he graduated college, he was a janitor at a nursing home. He then got a job at Burger King. He was a skinny, shortish, balding guy. All he cared about was watching sports. When I knew him, he had never had a girlfriend. Don't know that I ever saw him talk to a girl. Like 4 years after college, I heard he was getting married. I was surprised. I ended up getting invited, and at the wedding was the first time I met his wife. She was absolutely gorgeous and seemed very nice. I was shocked. I didn't think they would last. They got married probably 20 years ago. To be honest, I haven't talked to him since the wedding, and I have no clue if they are still together. Holy crap, just search for him on Facebook. Looks like they are still together and they had 2 boys. Good for them. Story 51. Groom knocked the out of the pastor at the altar for making a harmless joke about the weather during proceedings, outdoor wedding. His groomsmen had to pull him off, and in doing so, the poor bride accidentally got kicked off the little stage they were on and broke her ankle and 2 fingers. It was a blessing in disguise, though, because none of us wanted that wedding to happen. He put us all off upon meeting him and was very controlling and aggressive. It took this incident for her to burst into tears and tell her mother how he'd been treating her on the way to the hospital. Wedding did not continue on, and groom was arrested for assault. Story 52. Oh, the costume wedding. I've never publicly shared this story before. I was ordained into the Universal Life Church back in September 1990. That was back when you had to do it the hard way, by sending in a postcard saying you wanted to be ordained. None of this fill out an online form crap. So after completing some more paperwork, I wound up being legally allowed to perform weddings in Oregon. My first was for a good friend, and several others were for when Multnomah County briefly allowed same weddings in 2004. However, I generally avoided weddings unless I really felt it was important for me to be there. I broke this rule about 20 years ago. I won't explain why, but suffice it to say that I agreed to perform an October wedding for a couple I didn't know. But a good friend told me they needed a minister. They wanted a non-religious wedding at their house. I said yes. The next several weeks involved me trying to get them to meet me for a rehearsal, but they always had a reason they couldn't meet. Further, when I asked about their vows, they simply asked me to write something. Okay, I've done this before. I can do this. The day of the wedding, they still hadn't met me except for phone conversations. My friend drove me to their place, an old house out in the middle of nowhere, and explained that it was a costume wedding because it was almost Halloween. So as we drove into their yard, complete with a rusting, broken-down pickup truck, I noticed they tried to hang ghosts in their trees, made from white trash bags. It looked like a bunch of Klan hoods hanging from their trees. As I entered the place, I was introduced to Pocahontas, a very underage girl dressed in an outfit that, clearly revealed she wasn't wearing a bra, but desperately needed one. I'll not say more, but I was not comfortable. I was surrounded by vampires, cowboys, and all manner of curious folk. I had a nice gray suit, complete with clerical collar, and everyone straightened up when I approached, seeing as to how I was the minister. I smiled and nodded. That was the part I was there to play. I was introduced to the bride as she was getting dressed, but she had no time for me. I explained that because we hadn't met, I still needed her and the groom to practice their vows, at least once. No time, she explained. She was half naked. I didn't argue. I came prepared. I've done this before. I'm not a complete. So as everyone gathered for the ceremony, I met the bride and groom and handed each of them a piece of paper with their vows highlighted. I explained that I would start and then prompt them to read their portions of the highlighted vows. Underage Pocahontas with her breasts hanging out was bouncing up and down next to us. I was not happy, but I smiled. Dressed in a nice suit with a clerical collar, I was the only normal person there. And I'll be damned if I'm going to ruin their big day. When the ceremony started, I started my bit and promptly forgot their names. So I referred to them as the bride and groom, hoping that everyone was drunk enough to not notice. They apparently were drunk enough. And then I started the vows. When it came time for the groom to read his part, he hesitated. I tried to discreetly point to his vows on the paper and he started reading. But that's when I realized he was functionally illiterate. That's when everyone in the audience learned he was functionally illiterate. It is difficult to convey just how emotionally charged this situation was, with a huge crowd of drunken cowboys, werewolves, superheroes, and so on, standing there holding beer bottles, cans of beer, or little red plastic cups of wine, listening to the groom trying to sound out the words on a piece of paper. They were realizing for the first time that the bride is marrying someone who cannot read. I had publicly humiliated the groom, and he refused to look up from the paper when he finished. I ad-libbed a shorter version of the vows so that he wouldn't have to read more. I will never forget the horror of that moment. Despite all of this, we managed to stumble through to, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." And because we hadn't rehearsed and I was making this up as I went, I didn't know what to do next. No one knew what to do next. A hideously awkward silence descended on what should have been the happiest moment of their lives. And so everyone looked at me, as the minister, for guidance. Panicking, I said in a loud voice, "And now it's time for a question and answer session." I turned them towards the crowd and stepped back after some brave soul asked the first question. It went surprisingly well, and the questions fired fast and thick as I slipped towards the kitchen to get away from the mess. I discovered to my surprise that it was a BYOB, bring your own beer wedding. They were kind enough to hand me a can of Pabst Blue Ribbon. My friend and I retired to the back porch during the celebration and discreetly made a bet about how long the marriage would last. Then the back door burst open. An angel in white robes, with large wings and a cigarette dangling from her lips, stormed out, cussing up a storm. I immediately fell back to my minister role and asked, "What's troubling you on this beautiful day, sister?" "My sister married and—" We drove home in silence, and I vowed never again to perform a wedding for people I didn't know. I broke the rule for the same weddings mentioned above. Years later, I found out that while the wife was giving birth, the husband was having with his girlfriend. Story 53. I've had the same best friend since I was 4. We are now 29. My friend didn't start drinking until 6 months ago. That's right, never had a drink until she was 29. I introduced her to her now husband when we were 15. They were the perfect couple, and I admired them. 2 hours before the wedding, I'm helping her get ready, and she told me that 1 week ago, she got drunk and hooked up with another guy. I'm utterly shocked. She tells me I've never cheated on my fiancé, but when I started drinking IDK, it just happened. The wedding goes on, and I'm uncomfortable, but I didn't want to tell now husband. I felt loyal to my friend. At the reception, she was drunk and hitting on this guy in front of her new husband. He was clearly bothered by it. But that's when I realized that my best friend of 25 years had a huge problem, and their marriage probably wouldn't last. Story 54. My favorite. One time a wedding I attended was a country one. The girl was a crazy horse girl. The wedding was on the same day as the Kentucky Derby. The wedding was delayed with guests in attendance for the race to finish. Then at dinner, when glasses clanged for the first time, the girl rolled her eyes before kissing him. They lasted 6 months. This wedding supplied me with my favorite can koozie. Something old, something new, something from us to hold your brew. I enjoy the koozies of divorced couples. Makes for good conversation. Story 55. The two I know of personally. Buddy of mine got married after college and told me a few years later, the day they landed at Barcelona for their honeymoon, his bride had a herpes outbreak, both places. He didn't know she had herpes. A wedding I went to ended early when the groom got coked out and was walking around with powder on his nose. His wife's father was a retired police officer and worked at a church. Surprisingly, they are still happily together, but I definitely said to myself and others that this wedding was not going to last long at all. Story 56. A good friend got married to a girl he had dated for years and been long distance with for the last 2-3 years. We'd gotten to know him during this time. Wedding weekend rolls around, and the way the bride and her whole family talked about the groom and interacted with him, it was like they were talking about a totally different person. I guess the bride was so focused on getting to the altar that she hadn't noticed her groom had changed in many important areas. For example, she wrote their vows for them both. I'm sitting there baffled because the vows are referencing goals I know aren't his and roasting him for hobbies he doesn't have. One referenced her letting him go hunting. My husband and I are sitting there like this man has been a vegetarian the entire time we've known him. Shockingly, they're divorced now. Story 57. We knew that well before my husband's sister married her on-again, off-again boyfriend. She was livid that my husband got married before her, so she gave her boyfriend an ultimatum. Surprisingly, the guy fell for it, hook, line, and sinker, and proposed to her. She made him spend every last penny of his house fund on her dream wedding, which cost well over $50K. During the wedding rehearsal, they were shooting each other angry looks, which was actually normal in their relationship. They were always fighting. It was so obvious that the guy didn't want to go through with this wedding, but he felt that it was too late to back out, I guess. On the day of the wedding, the guy was so boozed up. He wasn't himself at all. Instead of acting tense around her, he was smiling and laughing all night. This was a dead giveaway that he needed a lot of liquid courage to get through the day. He ended up cheating on her about a year later, but she stayed with him. I'm pretty sure she holds it against him every chance she can get. I feel bad for him because she's very toxic and manipulative, but at the same time, I don't feel bad for him because he got himself into this mess. Story 58. This will be lost in the sea of comments, but a close friend of mine decided 5 years down the road to marry the girl he'd impregnated and abandoned when he was 16. In the wedding planning stages, I went from being designated best man to bridal party usher to musician. The bride-to-be basically eliminated every single one of his friends from having any part in the entourage and replaced them all with her friends. On the wedding day at church, the very moment they were pronounced man and wife, the bride turned to their 5-year-old daughter, ring bearer, who was sitting in the first row, and blew her an especially loud, emphatic kiss. I'm not doing the gesture to her daughter justice here, but it sent chills down my spine for the distinctly vengeful tone it struck. About 3 years later, I bumped into my buddy Groom on the train back from work. It was a Friday night. We both had jack nothing to do, so we went out and got plastered. I learned after a whole bunch of drinks that it lasted maybe 3 months, and that she spent every last waking moment of those months making him as miserable as humanly possible. You ever see the Flintstones? He slurred to me in total drunkenness. You ever see the episode where Wilma throws Fred out of the house? Well, let me tell you, that happens grix or bats. That happens. Story 59. 3-tier cake with a couple hundred cupcakes around it. Bride and groom did the cutting, then went out for sunset pictures. There's about 100 guests. I'd heard throughout the night that the bride was pissed that the guests helped themselves to the cake after dinner. I figured that something got twisted in the message by the time it made the rounds. But no. We went to say goodbye to the couple, and bride remarked how she couldn't believe people were so rude and they were supposed to eat the cupcakes because the cake was meant for the couple to take home. A 3-tier, no fake tears, cake. Story 60. I was a groomsman in a wedding in 2009. The bride was a pharmacist, and she came down the aisle completely stoned on prescription painkillers. She was out of it, barely able to participate. She couldn't really get through the vows, so they kind of skipped that part and went straight to the public signing of the ceremonial marriage license. The whole ceremony didn't last 10 minutes. The whole time everyone is looking at everyone else like, "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" That night, instead of going out together and starting their married life, the groom called me to pick him up and take him out to a bar. After he's in the car, he says we need to go to his in-laws' house and find his wife. She's there with her parents hanging out like she hadn't just gotten married to the dude who was standing in their living room. He picks something up and we leave her there, and we go down to Bourbon Street and get loaded on his wedding night. Turns out he's gay. I'm not sure the marriage even made it a year. Story 61. My brother got married to the devil. I hated this. She was so mean to my brother, and you can tell I hate her in every pic she was in with me. My mom and dad pulled my brother aside like 10 times before and said, "We can leave. Just get in the car. You don't have to do this." He did it, and they were married less than 2 years because, surprise, she gave him an ultimatum to marry her, and she was such a cold and frigid person that she wouldn't even talk to him when she got home. Her excuse was, "I'm a teacher. I talk to kids all day. I don't want to come home and talk to you." He's with someone really good, and she's still all alone and miserable. I love it.